Okay, so today we're diving deep into how those everyday habits we have really kind of shape who we become. And we're taking a look at James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, for this one.
Sounds good.
And really the mission here is for everyone to understand, how to build those good habits,
Yeah.
break the bad ones, and ultimately how those tiny actions end up, contributing to your identity.
It's funny because I think when we struggle to adopt a positive habit or ditch a negative one, right away people think, oh, it's willpower. I just don't have enough willpower.
Yeah.
But Clear actually highlights something really interesting in his work. He calls it the plateau of latent potential.
Okay.
So think of it as all that unseen work that's kind of building up beneath the surface. So you might be putting in the effort consistently,
Yeah.
but those results, they're not always immediately visible. So
Yeah.
it feels like you're kind of stuck, and then all of a sudden, boom, you have this breakthrough.
It's like you're working and working and working, and then all of a sudden it's like overnight success.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is never really overnight success.
Right.
It's just that people didn't see the work that was happening.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's like, if you're trying to melt an ice cube and it's 25 degrees out and you heat it up to 31 degrees, you've definitely added energy to it.
Right.
But visually, nothing's really changed.
Yeah.
But all that work you put in isn't wasted because, once it hits 32 degrees, then it melts.
Exactly.
And that kind of gradual buildup, that's a good way to think about the connection between our habits and who we are.
Yeah.
Our identity, it's not just the actions, but what those actions tell us about ourselves.
For sure. And Clear really argues that any behaviors that don't align with how we see ourselves, those just aren't likely to stick.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So deep down, see yourself as like a purely analytical thinker,
Right.
consistently engaging in creative habits. It's going to feel like an uphill battle every single time.
Yeah, like you're fighting against yourself.
Exactly.
Right.
So that lasting habit change, it often needs a shift in those core beliefs about who we are.
That you're changing who you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can have all the best intentions in the world, but if your habits aren't voting for that new identity, it's gonna be tough.
Okay, so let's get into this idea of habits as votes for our identity.
Yeah.
This was one of the things that really stuck with me from the book.
You're sure?
The book talks about how every action we take, no matter how small, it's like casting a vote for the kind of person we want to be.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about making these huge declarations. It's more like the accumulation of these small, consistent behaviors that actually provide evidence for that new identity.
And it's interesting to think about it that way because, all those seemingly minor actions, they have this cumulative effect over time.
Yeah.
So think about this. Each time you decide to have a healthy snack over junk food,
Right.
you're not just making a dietary choice. You're actually casting a vote for your identity as someone who actually values their health.
You're telling yourself, I am the type of person who eats healthy food.
Exactly.
In trim.
And each time you resist hitting the snooze button and you get up and work on that personal project, you're reinforcing that identity of someone who is disciplined and committed.
Right. Or even just listening closely to someone when they're talking to you.
Yeah.
You're casting a vote for being a caring and empathetic person.
Exactly.
It's like every little thing you do is telling yourself a story.
Right.
And reinforcing it.
Yeah. And what's cool is, with those repeated small wins, it builds something really powerful. It builds self-trust.
Self-trust.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we see ourselves, consistently following through on these little commitments, we actually start to believe in our ability to achieve the bigger goals.
It's like proof.
Exactly.
Like I did this small thing and I did it.
Right.
So I can probably do this bigger thing too.
Exactly. The evidence stacks up and the story we tell ourselves about who we are, it starts to change.
I like that.
Yeah.
No, it works both ways too, right?
It does.
Like negative habits, they also cast votes.
Exactly.
They're reinforcing an identity that we might not actually want.
Right.
But the good news is that we don't have to be perfect.
Exactly.
Progress isn't about being perfect.
It's like an election. There's going to be votes that don't go your way.
Right, right.
But the key is to aim for that majority.
Yeah.
Those little lapses, they don't negate all the progress you're making. As long as that overall trend of your actions, it's aligning with the identity you're trying to build.
Yeah, you can have a cheat day and still lose weight.
Exactly.
As long as most of the time you're eating healthy.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if we're trying to be intentional about shaping our identity through our habits, it sounds like there's a two-step process.
Yeah.
The first part is we need to clearly define who we want to become.
Yes.
Whether that's in our personal life, in our relationships, or, even at work.
Right.
What are those core values that we want to have? And then the second part is to start providing the evidence for that identity.
Right.
Through small, consistent wins.
Yeah, those little atomic habits.
Yeah, those atomic habits.
Exactly. And to really understand how to implement this, Clear breaks down every habit into 4 fundamental stages that happen in the same order every single time.
Okay.
Cue, craving, response, and reward.
Cue, craving, response, reward.
Yeah, it gives us a roadmap for understanding how our habits work.
Okay, so let's start with the first stage, the cue.
Okay.
What exactly is a cue and what's going on in our brains when it happens?
So the cue is basically the starting signal for the habit. It's a piece of information that your brain links with a potential reward.
Okay.
So think way back to, our ancestors, their brains were super focused on cues that meant basic survival, food or danger.
Right.
But nowadays, even though we still have those primal instincts, a lot of times we're responding to cues that predict secondary rewards. Things like, social media notifications or the smell of coffee or even just the end of the workday. All those things our brain has learned to associate with certain outcomes like connection or energy or relaxation.
So it's like our brain is saying, oh, here's a signal that something good might be coming soon.
Exactly.
So what happens after that initial trigger?
So that brings us to the second stage, which is the craving.
Okay.
And this is the motivational force behind the habit. It's that desire to change your current state.
Okay.
Now, it's not necessarily that you're craving the habit itself, but you're craving that feeling or the reward that you think the habit will give you.
Okay, so give me an example.
Sure. So you might not actually crave checking your email, but you crave the feeling of being informed or just clearing out your inbox.
So it's not that I want to do the thing. I just want the feeling that I get after I've done the thing.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, so then what's the next stage?
So then we have the response.
Yeah.
And that's the actual behavior that you perform.
Okay.
So it can be physical, like going for a run, or mental, like opening up a certain app on your phone.
Right.
The key is that it's the action you take to satisfy that craving that the cue triggered.
So it's like I have the cue makes me crave something.
Yeah.
So then I do a thing to satisfy that craving.
Exactly.
Okay, and then finally we get to the reward.
Right.
So what role does that reward play in making a habit stick?
The reward has 2 main jobs. First, it satisfies the craving you had.
Right.
And secondly, and really importantly for habit formation, it teaches your brain which actions are worth remembering and repeating in the future.
So it's like our brain is constantly saying, did this work out for me?
Exactly.
Was this a good thing or a bad thing?
Right. Our brains are always evaluating if a behavior was beneficial or not.
Okay.
So feelings of pleasure, those act as positive feedback. It's like a signal saying, hey, do this again.
If this was good, let's do it again.
Exactly. And on the flip side, if you feel disappointed, that's negative feedback.
Like, oh, I didn't like that.
Yeah.
So the reward closes that loop.
Exactly. It links the cue, the craving, and the response all together.
So if any one of those is missing, then the habit just won't form.
Exactly. If you don't have a clear cue, the habit won't even start. If the craving isn't strong enough, you're not going to be motivated to do anything.
Right.
If the response is too hard or unpleasant, you probably won't repeat it. And if the reward doesn't satisfy that craving, your brain won't think it's worth remembering.
Right. So they all have to work together.
Exactly. All 4 stages are absolutely essential for a habit to form.
I like that. Okay, so that's a really clear breakdown of cue, craving, response, reward.
Yeah.
Now, how about how our brains process all of this, and how being aware of these processes can actually help us change our habits?
It's fascinating because the human brain is like this incredible prediction machine.
A prediction machine.
Yeah, it's constantly absorbing all this information from our environment, comparing it to past experiences, and then it categorizes these cues to figure out what might happen next.
Right.
And then it tries to decide the most efficient response.
So it's like a chess player.
Yeah.
A really good chess player can see patterns that a novice player wouldn't even notice.
Exactly. Their brain has learned to spot those subtle cues through years of practice.
So it's like we're all developing these super efficient autopilot systems for all of our routine behaviors.
Yeah.
But what happens when those habits become so automatic that we don't even think about them anymore?
That's when you can run into some trouble.
Okay.
So the more ingrained and automatic a behavior becomes, the less conscious awareness we have of it, and we start operating on autopilot, and we might not even realize if those habits are still good for us or if they're still helping us reach our goals.
It's like you're not even thinking about it. You're just doing it.
Exactly. And Clear says that a lot of our setbacks actually come from not being aware of our daily habits.
So how do we, break out of that autopilot and bring those unconscious habits into our awareness.
So becoming aware, that's the first step to making any intentional change to your behavior.
Okay.
And Clear talks about a couple of practical techniques. One is called pointing and calling.
Pointing and calling.
Yeah, it's this method they use in high reliability industries like aviation and healthcare, where professionals actually say out loud what they're doing while they're doing it.
Interesting.
It sounds really simple, but by saying the habit out loud, you force it into your conscious mind.
So you're making yourself aware of it.
Exactly. Clear actually mentions that his wife uses this when she packs for trips. She'll say out loud, passport, wallet, phone, just to make sure she has everything.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, it definitely prevents those.
Did I remember my passport moment?
For sure. Okay, so what's the other technique?
The other one is called the habits scorecard.
Habits scorecard, okay.
Yeah, and it's basically where you make a list of all your current habits, the good ones and the bad ones.
Okay.
And just the act of writing them down makes you realize how many habits you actually have structuring your day, many of which you probably don't even notice.
Right, like I never even thought about that as a habit. Exactly, and once you have that list, you can start to analyze each habit. Think about its cue, its craving, its response, its reward.
Okay.
And that increased awareness is what lets you make intentional changes.
So awareness is the first step.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to Clear's first law of behavior change.
Yeah.
Make it obvious.
Okay.
What are some ways that we can make those good habits more prominent in our lives?
So one key strategy is to use implementation intentions.
Implementation intentions.
Yeah, basically, these are super specific plans that tell you exactly when, where, and how you'll do that new habit.
Okay.
So instead of saying something vague like, I want to eat healthier,
Right.
you would say, I will prepare a healthy lunch at 12 p.m. in my kitchen every weekday.
Oh, so you're like giving yourself very specific instructions.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
And research actually shows that people who make these specific plans are way more likely to stick to their goals.
Interesting.
Because it takes away that ambiguity and reduces that mental friction of having to decide when and where to act.
You're not giving yourself any excuses.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, what's another way to make good habits more obvious?
Another great technique is called habit stacking.
Habit stack.
Yeah. And it's where you link a new habit you want to build to an existing habit that you already do regularly.
Okay.
So the formula is super simple after current habit, I will new habit.
I like that.
Yeah, so you're basically taking advantage of an established routine to trigger your new desired behavior.
Okay, give me some examples.
Sure. So let's say you want to express gratitude more often.
Okay.
You could say, after I finish my morning coffee, I will write down 3 things I'm grateful for.
Okay.
Or maybe you want to keep your workspace tidy. You could say, after I finish a task, I will spend 2 minutes decluttering my desk.
Right. Or like after I put on my running shoes, I'll text a friend my running route.
Exactly.
So they know where I am.
Yeah. Or if you want to read more, you could say, after I brush my teeth at night, I'll read 1 page of my book.
Yeah, I like that it's like using the momentum of something you're already doing to start something new.
Exactly. And consistently linking these small actions together over time, they can lead to some big changes.
I like that. Okay, so what's the third way to make good habits more obvious?
The third one is all about environment design.
Environment design.
Yeah, and that means intentionally shaping your surroundings so that the cues for your good habits are super visible and easy to access.
Right.
And at the same time, you want to minimize or remove cues for bad habits.
Okay.
Because we're way more influenced by our immediate environment than we often realize.
Like if I have a bowl of fruit in the cupboard
Yeah.
and a jar of candy on the counter,
Exactly.
I'm probably going to eat the candy.
Right, because it's right there. It's the obvious option.
It's just easier.
And Clear points out that vision is our strongest sense, so visual cues are super powerful.
Yeah.
Like just putting your running shoes by the door the night before can make you way more likely to go for that run in the morning.
Okay, so it's all about making the things I want to do more obvious.
Exactly, and making the things you don't want to do less obvious.
Mm.
So if you're trying to snack less, don't keep those snacks in plain sight.
Right.
He also says that changing your environment completely can be a great way to change your habits.
Okay, why is that?
Because you're getting away from all those familiar triggers that are associated with your current habits.
Oh, that makes sense.
There's a really interesting example he gives about how heroin addiction rates dropped significantly among soldiers returning from Vietnam.
Because they were in a new environment.
Exactly. The change in environment and those associated cues had a huge impact.
Wow.
So a lot of times designing a disciplined environment is actually more effective than just relying on willpower alone.
Yeah, that makes sense. So instead of just trying to resist temptation all the time, just make it so you're not tempted as much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I like that. So let's move on to the second law now.
Okay.
Make it attractive.
Right.
How do we make those good habits more appealing?
So the main idea here is that the more appealing something is, the more likely we are to make it a habit.
Right.
And what makes something attractive to our brains?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times it comes down to the anticipation of a reward,
Okay.
which triggers the release of dopamine in our brain.
Dopamine.
Yeah. And Clear explains that habits basically run on this dopamine-driven feedback loop.
Okay.
So highly habit-forming behaviors, whether they're good or bad, they usually involve a big release of dopamine.
So like what kind of things?
Things like using social media or eating comfort food.
Right. Or like drugs.
Exactly. Even basic survival things like eating and socializing, they release dopamine.
So it's not always a bad thing.
No, not at all. It's just how our brains work.
So how can we use this to our advantage?
Yeah.
How can we make good habits feel more desirable?
Well, one really effective technique is temptation bundling.
Temptation bundling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that means pairing an action you need to do with an action you want to do.
Okay.
So the formula is after habit I need to do,
Yeah.
I will do habit I want to do.
So it's like rewarding yourself for doing the thing you don't really want to do.
Exactly. You're using the appeal of the want habit to motivate you to do the need habit.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay, so what are some examples?
So let's say you want to listen to your favorite podcast,
Okay,
but you also know you need to exercise.
right.
You could
Right.
make a rule that you only listen to that podcast while you're exercising.
Okay,
Or maybe you love checking social media, but you know you need to focus on work.
right.
You could tell yourself you'll only check social media after you've finished a certain amount of work.
Okay, so I'm tricking my brain into doing the thing I need to do by letting it have the thing it wants.
Exactly.
I like that. Okay, so what else influences how attractive a habit is?
Our social environment plays a big role too.
Okay, how so?
Well, as humans, we really want to belong and be accepted by our peers.
Right.
So Clear suggests joining a culture where the behavior you want is already the norm,
Okay.
because we tend to pick up the habits and attitudes of those around us without even realizing it.
So like if all my friends are really into fitness, I'm probably going to be more into fitness too.
Right. Or if you're in a highly academic environment, you're more likely to value academic achievement.
It's like peer pressure, but in a good way.
Exactly. And studies have even shown that our social connections can affect our health behaviors, like what we eat and how much we exercise.
Wow. So it's not just about what I think. It's also about who I'm surrounded by.
Exactly. We're influenced by what Clear calls the many, meaning the collective behavior of our social groups, and the powerful, meaning the behavior of people we admire or look up to.
So if I want to develop a certain habit, I should try to be around people who already have that habit.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. Are there any other ways to make good habits more attractive?
Yeah, absolutely. We can also change how we think about our habits.
Okay.
Instead of focusing on the negatives, try to focus on the benefits.
Oh, so it's like a mindset shift.
Exactly.
Right.
So instead of saying, I have to go to the gym after work, you could say, I get to go to the gym and feel energized and strong.
Yeah, it's like turning it into a positive.
Right. Or instead of thinking of saving money as a restriction, focus on the freedom and security it gives you.
So it's like I get to save money.
Exactly. By changing how we talk to ourselves about our habits, we can make them feel less like chores and more like opportunities.
Okay, so it's about the story we tell ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so that was make it attractive. Let's move on to the third law.
Okay.
Make it easy.
Sounds good.
How do we make those good habits easier to do?
So the key principle here is that mastery comes from repetition, not from trying to be perfect right away.
Okay.
When you're starting a new habit, the main thing is to focus on getting your reps in, as Clears calls it.
Reps.
Yeah, it's like practice.
Okay.
Building a habit is really about making it automatic through repeating the action over and over again.
Right.
And that repetition strengthens those neural pathways in your brain that are linked to the behavior.
So it's like if I do something enough times, it becomes second nature.
Exactly. There's a neurological principle called Hebb's law that basically says neurons that fire together wire together.
So our brains are actually changing as we build these habits.
Exactly. And that's why how often you do a habit is usually more important than how long or how intensely you do it, especially when you're first starting out.
So it's better to do a little bit every day
Yeah.
than to try and do a lot once in a while.
Exactly. Think about the habits that really dominate our lives, like checking our phones constantly.
Right.
They're usually so easy to do. They don't take much effort or thought at all.
Yeah, it's like effortless.
Right. And in a way, Clear says that every habit is kind of like friction that's stopping us from reaching our goals.
Okay, I like that analogy.
So dieting involves the friction of resisting those tempting foods. Exercising involves the friction of physical effort.
Right.
We don't actually crave the habit itself, we crave the result it gives us.
Okay.
So the easier the habit is to do, the less friction there is between us and what we want to achieve.
So it's all about removing obstacles.
Exactly.
Okay, so what are some ways to reduce that friction and make good habits easier to start?
Well, one of the best ways is that environment design we talked about earlier. Remember making those cues obvious?
Yeah.
But now we're focusing on making our environment help us do those good habits as easily as possible.
Okay.
So if you're trying to eat healthier, keep your fridge stocked with healthy foods that are ready to go.
So there's no excuse.
Exactly. Or if you want to practice an instrument more often, keep it out where you can see it and easily reach it.
Right.
And on the other hand, you can make bad habits harder to do.
Oh.
If you're trying to stop mindlessly scrolling on social media, delete those apps from your phone or log out after each use.
So you have to actually think about it before you do it.
Exactly. You're adding an extra step, making it less convenient.
Right. So it's like I'm designing my environment to make it easier to do the things I want to do and harder to do the things I don't want to do.
Exactly.
I like that. What's another technique for making good habits easier to start?
There's something called the 2-minute rule.
2-minute rule.
Okay. Yeah. And this means that when you're starting a new habit, you should make it so easy that it takes less than 2 minutes to do.
Oh, interesting.
The goal isn't to do the whole thing perfectly right away. It's just to master the act of starting. So instead of saying read before bed, you say read 1 page.
Right.
Instead of do 30 minutes of yoga, you say unroll my yoga mat.
So I'm just tricking myself into starting.
Exactly. You want to make it so easy that there's no resistance.
Yeah.
Then once you got that 2-minute version down, you can slowly increase the time or intensity.
It's like I'm building momentum.
Exactly. You're overcoming that initial hurdle of just getting started.
Okay, so what's the final way to make good habits easier to stick with?
The last key strategy here is using commitment devices.
Commitment devices, okay.
Yeah, these are choices you make now that control your actions in the future.
Okay.
So you're basically committing to good behavior ahead of time.
Okay.
And making those bad behaviors harder to do. Clear gives this great example of the writer Victor Hugo.
Victor Hugo.
Yeah, to stop himself from procrastinating, he actually had his valet lock away all of his clothes.
What?
Yeah, so he'd be forced to stay inside and write.
Wow, so he was like really serious about getting his writing done.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there are tons of ways to use commitment devices in your own life.
Like what?
Well, you could set up automatic bill payments so you don't miss any and get late fees.
Right.
Or unsubscribe from those tempting emails from stores, or even just tell a friend about your goals so you feel accountable.
Oh yeah, like if I tell someone I'm going to do something, then I'm more likely to actually do it.
Exactly. The idea is to make those good habits automatic and those bad habits practically impossible to do when you're tempted.
Okay.
It's like the saying goes, the best way to break a bad habit is to make it impractical to carry out.
I like that.
Okay.
Okay, so we've covered make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy.
Right.
Now let's move on to the fourth and final law. Make it satisfying.
Okay.
Why is that feeling of satisfaction so important for making habits stick?
Well, the basic principle here is that we repeat behaviors that are immediately rewarded.
Okay.
And we avoid behaviors that are immediately punished.
Right.
Our brains are wired to prioritize instant gratification. It's just how we evolved. For most of human history, the consequences of our actions were felt pretty quickly.
Right.
But good habits often take a long time to show results, and the effort is felt right away.
Yeah, you got to put in the work up front.
Exactly.
Right.
So that's why immediate satisfaction is so important. It reinforces those good habits.
So how can we build in those immediate rewards to make our good habits more satisfying?
Clear suggests using what he calls reinforcement.
Reinforcement.
Yeah. So after you do a good habit, give yourself a little reward right away.
Okay.
It could be something as simple as enjoying a few minutes of your favorite activity after working out, or having a healthy snack after making a nutritious meal, or even just checking a task off your to-do list.
So it's like giving yourself a little pat on the back.
Exactly. The key is to choose a reward you actually enjoy, and to give it to yourself right after you do the good habit.
Okay.
And on the flip side, when you're trying to break a bad habit, you can make the immediate consequences a little bit unpleasant.
Like how?
So, for example, if you're trying to stop a bad online habit, you could immediately do a small chore that you hate right afterward.
Interesting. So it's like associating the bad habit with something negative.
Exactly.
Okay, what's another good way to make good habits more satisfying?
Another really effective technique is habit tracking.
Habit tracking, okay.
Yeah, this means visually keeping track of your progress on your habits.
Okay.
And this gives you clear evidence of your success, which can be really motivating and instantly satisfying.
Yeah, like if I can actually see that I'm making progress,
Exactly.
then it feels more real.
Exactly. And habit tracking can be done in a ton of ways. You can use a calendar to mark off days you completed the habit, or use habit tracking apps or spreadsheets.
Right.
It's all about having that visual representation of your progress to remind you to stay on track.
And it's like checking things off a to-do list.
Exactly. Gives you that little feeling of accomplishment.
I like that. Are there any downsides to habit tracking that we should be aware of?
Yeah, there's something called Goodhart's Law that we have to be careful of.
Goodhart's Law.
Yeah, it basically says that when you focus too much on a measurement, it stops being a good measurement.
Okay, so how does that apply to habit tracking?
Well, the danger is that we can get so focused on the numbers, like maintaining a streak or hitting a certain target, that we forget about the actual goal we were trying to achieve.
Oh, so it's like if I'm tracking my steps, I might just walk around my house a bunch to hit my step goal, even if I'm not actually getting a good workout.
Exactly. You have to remember that habit tracking is a tool to help you, not the goal itself.
Right. It's supposed to give you feedback, not rule your life.
Exactly.
Okay, so what are some other ways to make good habits more satisfying in the long run?
Clear talks about the power of not breaking the chain.
Okay.
So once you've built a consistent streak with the good habit, try your best to keep that chain going.
Right.
Even if you can only do a tiny bit of the habit on some days, continuing that streak gives you a sense of accomplishment and reinforces the behavior.
Like, don't give up.
Exactly. He also has a rule called never miss twice.
You never miss twice.
Yeah, so if you do miss a day, get right back on track the next day.
Okay.
Missing once is understandable, but missing 2 days in a row can really hurt the habit.
Yeah, it's like you're breaking the momentum.
Exactly. And finally, he talks about accountability partners and habit contracts.
Oh, yeah, like if I tell someone I'm going to do something.
Right, by sharing your goals with someone else or even making a formal agreement with consequences for not following through, you create a social cost for neglecting your habits.
So like if I make a bet with a friend that I'll go to the gym every day.
Exactly. Or if you publicly announce your goal, like on social media, that can be a really powerful motivator.
It's like, I don't want to let people down.
Exactly.
Okay, so those are some great ways to make good habits more satisfying and keep ourselves accountable. Now we've talked about the 4 fundamental laws of behavior change.
Right.
Are there any more advanced tactics for people who really want to take things to the next level?
Yeah. Once you've built a solid base of good habits, the next step is to refine and optimize those habits for continuous improvement.
Okay.
And one key aspect of that is aligning your habits with your personality and your strengths.
Okay.
You know, our genes actually influence our tendencies and preferences.
Right.
So figuring out which habits naturally fit you can make you more successful and make the process more enjoyable.
So it's like working with myself instead of against myself.